All right. Then here we go. Just a quick reminder for those who will be joining us on the chat. Just have a look at the chat, whether you will be chatting on YouTube or on we'll be chatting on LinkedIn or directly on Riverside. Make sure that you drop your questions for us directly on either platform. I will be posting up the link for getting getting access to the live audience on Riverside. For those who not yet have the link, I will definitely post it up for those who do. And of course, this is recorded, so you can always watch it. Definitely watch it again in the various platforms. All right. So without further ado, let's uh, let's get started. Just give me a second. Need to get updated. All right. Okay. Just had a bit of a glitch on the stream, so I think we are good to go. Great. Okay. Great stuff. We are live on LinkedIn and we are live on YouTube. Man, live streaming is no not a pup in place, I must say. So all right, all good. Let's get started. So today we are definitely going to be talking about something quite interesting to for me and for a lot of us, which is about personal finance. The theme of this specific episode is about 8 everyday habits that keep Africans broke. Habits that keep Africans broke. Now, if you put Africans and broke in the same sentence, it's almost like you are talking about water and water in many contexts. But this is quite important for us to get into. So we're going to be talking about 8 specific habits that, in my view, has helped me to understand and to detect where am I going and the financial mold that is essentially building in our lives and how to detect them. And I do believe that it's all down to our habits. And of course, it is something that we need to be well aware of. Now, let me start with this. A couple of weeks ago, I had a close relative that hadn't spoken in a long time, and he's a well sought after professional living in Europe, and he definitely manages his career very well, but yet, like most Africans, he struggles with his finances. He's mainly driven by a burden to provide constantly back home in his home country, uh, in Africa, and so there's a lot of questions regarding some of his decisions, but more importantly, there's a lot of questions regarding some of his habits. And that really led me to this specific episode today, which is essentially a reflection on my part, and I will share a few things from my part. But essentially, it's something that, in my view, needs to be spoken of a bit more. We need to be candid about it. We need to be able to speak about it openly. And I do believe it is something that requires us to take an honest look that it's not really about the job. It's not really about, oftentimes, it's not really about just how much you earn, but oftentimes it's mainly about the habits that you've instilled or you are subconsciously doing without necessarily realizing. And of course, there is a basis to start dealing with your finances, right? A poor person does not, someone who is poor, i.e., does not really have even something to eat, cannot really speak about personal finance. But this is not really something we are talking about. We are talking about people like you and me who have a job, who are definitely doing quite well financially. And it's really all about just understanding how what are the different habits that we can definitely tackle. And so I'll talk through 8 habits, and I will use the analogy of the general household items that we have. So I'll rely on your imagination to really think about it, but I don't think it's very difficult to imagine and to make the connection between some of the things that we often see on a day to day in our house and the habits that are forming when it comes to our personal finance that really hold us back. So, habit number one is over reliance of a single income. Single source of income is something that is often overlooked. Now, the dynamics of a African house is oftentimes there is a breadwinner, usually falls on the man. I mean, there's nothing stereotypical about that. It's just how circumstance often work, and the woman, and usually multiple children in the house, and the woman usually is the primary caregiver. But the man usually takes that responsibility. But the point here is whether it's a man or a woman, there's a primary person who brings home money. And the analogy here in understanding that a single source of income is already a problem is that you can think of the analogy is a grater, right? A grater is something that you grate with, right? But some of you might have noticed what we call a multi-face grater. A multi-face grater is essentially a grater that allows one to have a slicer on the one face, allows us to grate really fine, for example, like cheese to put on top of a pizza that you've made at home or a salad, allows a slightly bigger pieces to be grated where it's, fine pieces of carrots that allows you to put in a salad. And the point I'm making here is that it's multifaceted. And the reason why it's important to understand kind of the analogy is that a multifaceted grater gives you options. It gives you options, not only grating, slicing, shredding, or zesting, right? A lemon zest, but the versatility ensures that not only does the grater last for longer, i.e., your personal finances are able to be stretched, but also it maximizes efficiency for doing the very task that requires a specific face of the grater. Now, if you were to think about it from a personal finance, what it's actually trying to say is that if you have a singles household, if you are in a household where you as a primary provider of income is not with your wife or with your spouse or with your partner, not thinking about how can we diversify, whether through a business, whether through a side hustle, whether through consulting, whether through giving English, whatever the case may be, to kids or language lessons, you essentially are slowly but surely becoming very inefficient with that source of income. Of course, one may argue that, oh no, we have enough. But essentially, the inefficiency comes through the risk that presents itself if, for example, that single source of income now all of a sudden disappears. And that already is a sign that you really need to take that into account. Of course, if you're single and you don't have anyone, I think this doesn't necessarily apply to the point of relying on someone else to um, to provide that income in that house, but it applies in the sense of diversifying and thinking about different types of incomes that you can. And this is very important for Africans in the sense that We should all, as Africans, think about a side hustle, or think about a business, or think about just using your skills outside of your main work. And that for me is the over reliance is already a risk that we can definitely start doing something about. So that's habit number one. All right. Habit number two is supporting family back home excessively. What does that mean? It means that uh, when we are definitely, just give me a second. Sorry, guys. Just there's a phone call happening. Sorry about that. Um, it's live, right? So these types of things do happen. So apologies. So I will get back to that point just now. Give me a second. Um, all right. So in terms of supporting family back home in excess, right? So this specific point is not about whether you should support family back home or not. As an African, this realization is normal, right? If you are African and if you live abroad and you have the privilege of having a job, supporting family back home where you come from is not a big deal. It is the status quo. You are an outlier. You have managed, and through the grace of God and through the help of people, you've managed to remove yourself from the circumstances that you grew up with or the people around you grew up with, and you have been privileged to have a job in a first world country or second world country, whatever the case may be, and it's essentially a duty to really start giving back. But the issue here is excessively. What does excessive mean? Now, analogy number two. Think about a leaky basin, or a basin that leaks, right? It drips water. So from the tap, a dripping tap, essentially. It leaks water at first very slowly, right? But some of you who might have seen it, of course, that sound irritating, of course, but not yet consequential. And what happens with that is you start getting a, a buildup of what will I call residue on on that faucet, on that specific tap, to the point where even whether you want to close that tap even more, you can't. So the leak keeps on happening. Now, if you were to do an experiment, which some of you have done, there's two things that can happen when you leave a leaking tap by itself. Two things can happen. One, the leak doesn't stop, which means if you were to clog up the basin and the drops which accumulate, overnight you start seeing there is a lot of water that is accumulated from just one drop. What's the point when it comes to excessive giving to family? The point here is that we need to have a balance when it comes to financial support. That is kind of habit number two, where you are not taking into account how much you're giving home, the fact that everything's an emergency and you feel compelled to just keep on giving. And one thing that I've learned in when it comes to giving to family, to friends, is that it is something I have to budget for. Whether I give or not, it is something that I have to budget for. And only within that budget do I help. And oftentimes, I even ask for what I can help. Not to say I have a lot of money, it's just to say that I'm able to be consistently aware of the fact that I only have so much to give, but I promise that I will give again if I have the following month. And that for me is a way of managing the leaking tap, a way of ensuring that it just doesn't keep on leaking to the point where it's not controllable. For me, when you think about it from that perspective, what it does, it gives you a sense of control, and it gives you a sense of that you need to consistently manage that specific habit in just giving and keep on giving. So that is habit number two. Excessive giving is like a dripping tap, and fundamentally, if you don't nip it in the bud, it will just amount to something that fundamentally cannot be sustainable. Habit number three, living beyond your means. Now, we've spoken about the specific habits of excessive giving that can start small and become big. We, of course, looked at into the over reliance of a single source of income. Living beyond your means has almost got nothing to do with your income. It's got everything to do with your understanding of what you are actually, what phase are you in. Now, you may be a student, you may be a working professional of 2, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Living beyond your means is a key principle to understand throughout the key stages of your life, including being a student. Now, you may be thinking, a student, you're almost forced to live within your means. That's not true. In actual fact, I've seen as a student many, many times over and over again that living beyond your means actually gets broken from the time that you move out of home and you are independent, quote unquote, from your parents, and your ability to understand financial terms really gets exposed, and you are living lavishly from a bursary, or you are living lavishly from your parents paying school, and you have no appreciation of what it means to live within your means. Now, what is the analogy here? The analogy of living within your means is a pressure cooker. Now, some of you know what a pressure cooker is, but I'll try and describe it very briefly. A pressure cooker is an appliance in your kitchen. My wife loves the pressure cooker that allows you to essentially cook food in a very, um, how can I say, standoff-ish way, meaning that you don't have to stand in front of the stove to basically um, have all of that going, and because of that, it allows you to really get into a state where you're able to prepare food and then leave for 2, 3 hours and then you come back. However, a pressure cooker, if not well designed, or if not well used, should I say, and overflows, is a hazard. It's a complete hazard to the house. Why? Because it cooks under what? Pressure, right? So it is pressure that cooks it and allows it to cook well, and the meat is tender and so forth, provided that you respect the various levels that this pressure cooker recommends you to cook at. And why is it so important when it comes to living beyond your means? Is because essentially what happens is if your expenses get to the point where it blows or it fills over your income or it surpasses your income, the pressure that it creates to your personal day to day eventually pops. And this for me is where not only alarm bells should go off, but alarm bells should be ringing really loudly. When you are not able to realize that you need to move, or you need to sell your car, or you can no longer buy clothes at a specific shop, or you can no longer give to whoever asks two or threefold, or you can no longer go to a restaurant because your expenses are no longer managed with the income that you have. Whether you're a student or whether you're 20 years into your career, this is the warning sign. So the habit is to ensure that you keep your expenses in check. It's easier said than done, but it starts with the principle of understanding that change needs to be made consistently to your budget, to your family's budget, to the budget of the people that you love, and to your friends and so forth, and give them the advice to say change is good when it comes to personal finance. Change is needed when it comes to personal finance. And the only way to ensure you don't live within your means and have a habit of using different credit facilities, which I do, but I understand the kind of the benefit, and we will talk about it a bit later, of using credit, is you got to live within your means. And change is the only way that ensures that you are flexible enough to understand that certain things can be reduced, certain things can be cut off for a period of time. You don't need Netflix and Disney and what else people buy and subscribe to, History Channel and National Geographic, and the list goes on to the point where you're spending, I don't know, a 100, 200, 300 euros or dollars per month when you cannot even afford a little gift for someone because you just over budget all the time. So that's habit number three. Now, habit number four is something that is close to my heart, and I do believe it is something that is often underlooked, and that is not investing in financial education. What does that mean? Not investing in financial education essentially says to me that you specifically are not interested in learning more about money. Why do I say that? Learning about money is not understanding, is not got nothing to do with a personal budget per se. I.e., some of us have a personal budget. Okay, we spend this on rent, we spend that. That's fine. That's actually the easiest part. Financial education's got a lot to do with how money can flow in and out of your personal budget that will allow you to either gain control or completely lose control. The analogy here of not investing is like a toolbox. A toolbox, as you've seen some mechanics whether you need to go fix your car or a bicycle or whatever, a toolbox is essentially a container that has all sorts of different tools, depending on what you need to fix, depending on what you need to be building, that essentially allows you to do a specific job. Now, a toolbox on its own, when closed, you don't know what it has, right? So a toolbox, in a way, is you. You you from a financial perspective have the potential of having something great inside of you. You have a potential of having really good skills to handle your finances, but unless you have the tools, unless you've invested in tools, and the tools in this case are the skills, the tools are the intuition, the tools is the foresight, but the tools is the understanding of where to find information will either make or break in you seizing opportunities where you can gain more control of your financials, or lose opportunities where you make bad decisions and lose more control of your finances. Now, when you think about it from that perspective, who wants a toolbox without tools? I mean, that is absurd. But that is essentially someone who handles money and gets a salary or a business every single month, but has never bought a book on how to read an income statement, has never bought a book on how, or has never read, uh, you know, how to handle cash flow and what a cash flow statement means, has never bothered to figure out what does a stock exchange even do, because those are the people that are paying you, whether indirectly or directly. A stock exchange pays you money, whether it's through your company that pays you, that is influenced by another company that is in the stock exchange, or whether directly you work in a stock exchange and of course you are trading, or you are directly getting paid through an income as a broker. The stock exchange in its entirety directs and influences your income. So having no tools inside a toolbox essentially causes you to not only be poor in understanding where your money actually comes from and how it's been handled, but completely naive of what influences your ability to find another job or your ability to actually keep your job. So, this habit of thinking that As long as I listen to YouTube videos or watch YouTube videos and listen to financial podcasts and so forth is enough. Yes, it's a start, but having an intrinsic appetite for reading and understanding financial matters is you ensuring that you have the right tools, specifically when you need it, when it comes to opportunities that come your way, when it comes to emergencies that come your way, but also when it comes to false information and false advice or completely absurd advice that comes your way. For example, if you had the tool, let's take a very good example. If you had the tools of understanding the the choices that the pros and cons that you need to consider when it comes to renting or buying a house, you wouldn't be so quick in buying a house just because you like it. You wouldn't be so quick in buying a house just because it's close to your school or it is close to work or you need to buy a house because it's an asset or you feel compelled because you've been renting for so many years. You wouldn't make that strong decision if you had the tools of evaluating the opportunity cost between renting and buying a house. That is a very clear example, and there's many YouTube videos on this, and there's many books on this. But essentially, you need to build up the tools and not rely on a financial advisor. You need to build up the tools. You need to figure out what does that mean. How do I draw up a spreadsheet to look at the cash flow if I were to have a rental apartment? How do I do that? You need to figure it out. Make sure you grow the skills and make sure you and that's something one of my favorite area when it comes to financial education because it feels to me it's a habit that allows me to gain back control of my finances. Even when I may be in the red, I know I have the tools to gain my control back. And that for me is key in ensuring that you don't have financial mold building up within your household. Whether you're a student, whether you think it doesn't apply to you because you're studying mechanical engineering or you're studying actuarial science or whatever the case may be, financial education applies to everyone because everyone is at a stage of having to either lose or gain control when it comes to how to handle money. So that is financial education as habit number 4 in ensuring that you have the right tools, you be in the toolbox and the potential to be able to handle different situations and take advantage of different opportunities. Now, habit number 5, lack of retirement planning. Now, this is slightly different uh, for younger guys, for the younger people who are watching this and will be watching this in the future. But at the same time, it is nonetheless relevant. Why? Fun retirement planning, it's got a lot to do, of course, with you thinking about, the day when you will no longer be working. And that's very difficult to think about as a 22, 23, 25-year old. However, when you think about combining this habit with understanding the need to have more financial education, there's one specific aspect that comes into play when it comes to retirement, and that is the power of compound interest. The power of compound interest when it comes to retirement plays a humongous role when you are young. And when I mean young, I don't mean when you are young and have money or have a job. I mean when you are young, period. I'm just talking about young because you have 200 €100, $100, 1,000 rands, wherever you're watching this, 1,000 pounds or 100 pounds, whatever the case may be. The power of compound interest in having a certain amount of money, it's got nothing to do with the amount when you're young. It's got everything to do with the fact that you are young. And so retirement planning is the analogy here is like a refrigerator with the malfunctioning seal, right? So every fridge has a seal, right, to ensure that the certain temperature inside the fridge remains. But this seal has a double function. It ensures that the fridge remains at the coldest temperature and the items remain as fresh as long as possible. But two, it also ensures that as the fridge is trying to contain a certain temperature in the fridge, the mechanism to keep this fridge at cold does not get strained too much. Why is that important? Because the more you strain your fridge, the less inefficient it comes to generating cold temperatures. And the more it becomes less efficient, the more power you have to use or energy to keep the fridge at a certain temperature. So you lose both ways. You lose in not only retaining the heat that's needed because of the door seal, but you are essentially, beating away at the compressor or at the motor at the back of the fridge, the stuff that you can hear, right? Your fridge makes noise. That is a compressor. It's a motor that's working. Becomes less and less efficient, which means you draw more and more power. And this is essentially exponential to the point where why a fridge eventually breaks down. But it's over time, and that's the point. It is over time. You may think everything is fine, but you are inefficient with your understanding of time. I am 41, right? I've got I've made some mistakes in my life. I've also had life churn me different cards that made me knock me down financially because I had to use my retirement, because I had to move and my previous company wasn't paying me anything and I had to use that money. But the point I'm making here is not so much, oh no, look at me now, I have nothing, but the power of time given the next 20, 30 years that I potentially have working, and the power of financial education allows you to plan a lot better, even in your 40s, to how you will want to retire or what type of money and wealth you will want to leave to your kids or to people that you love around you, that ensures that they can have a much better start than you had. For me, when you think about it from that perspective, a habit of understanding the power of compound interest, the power of time, the power of good planning, and the power of where to research on where to match better your retirement, and not so much about your company matching you. It's a habit. It's understanding how much can I learn and how much can I really grow in ensuring that things are tight and efficient in how I manage my money for the sake of the future um, me or the future family that I would have that potentially I will no longer be here to see. So that is habit number five. Okay. Habit number six is a different way of looking at finances, and that is avoiding risk. I didn't say that is a habit, right? A bad habit that you avoid, not that you should avoid risk, but a habit that you are avoiding risk too much. Now, what does that mean? This may sound like, oh, okay, that's weird, but think about it, and I want you to take some time. When when you are a risk avoider, what it means, and a risk avoider, for example, would be someone who has hundreds of thousands of dollars and has done really well for themselves, but they keep that money in their bank account where essentially they get, I don't know, close to not more than 1.5, 2% interest on that. And and they do that because they have a fear of moving their money and someone will steal it, and I'd rather have it under the mattress, and or I don't trust anybody with my money. I'd rather see it cash than seeing it in a bank. And you have a lot of these blasé, uneducated comments regarding don't trust the man. um, that is someone who is avoiding financial risk to their detriment. Why do I say that? Because the analogy here is like a stale loaf of bread, right? We all know what a loaf of bread looks like. Most of us eat bread. Some of us have stopped eating bread for other reasons. But I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about just in general. And the one thing that we can definitely see with the loaf of bread is that if you're not careful and you leave it out and you don't close it and you don't wrap it out in plastic when you've sliced it up, it goes stale. And the one thing I know for me really gets me upset and depressed is seeing a full loaf of bread completely stale. You can toast that thing. You can, I don't know, you can try and rough it out and eat, you know, really hard, not really toasted, but yet stale. And it's stale bread is also just yucky, right? And why is a loaf of bread just an analogy here? Because it's got potential. A loaf of bread has got potential to do many things. It's got potential to for nourishment. It's got potential to make different things. It's got potential to provide growth, in your children, in yourself, and really provide financial, um, um, margin because maybe you're eating bread instead of eating out or whatever the case may be. I mean, just eating bread in itself is not great, but the point here is that a stale loaf of bread is an opportunity lost. You had something and you didn't use it, and now it has become stale. It is you've lost. What does that mean? What does that mean? Let's take the analogy of you just leaving money in your bank account. Do you realize that inflation is 3%? So essentially, you are losing money every year by keeping your money in an account where you only get interest rate of 1.5%. You're losing money. Effectively, what it means is that the 100 euros or dollars that you have in your bank account today, with 1.5% increase in interest rate, will be worth less or will buy you less in 5 years' time because inflation was higher than the interest rate that was allowing you to grow your money. So you're losing money because you don't trust or you don't want to have the financial education, which is habit number number four. And so you have these blase understanding and the habits that goes with it in not ensuring that you take the right opportunity in maximizing the potential that you have at your disposal. And when you even think about stale bread can do many things, right? So to be thrown away or to be left like that or to be discarded is also you avoiding the risk of making breadcrumbs, for example, and figuring out, how to make croutons, or you knowing that okay, maybe if you freeze it just before it goes stale, you potentially can recover it when you unfreeze it because there will be moisture back in the bread when you freeze. If you don't know, that's what happens. And then when you take it out and you unfreeze it, it's actually soft again. So there are opportunities in making sure that you don't just avoid the risk, but to make use of the opportunity that you have through the financial education that you started getting, in ensuring that the risk is at an acceptable level for you to maximize the opportunities in front of you. That, as an African, comes down to financial education, comes down to understanding what is good risk and what is bad risk. A bad risk is saying, I'm going to start a taxi business while in Europe in center of Yaoundé or Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire. And I'm going to trust someone who's going to be driving. And I believe this guy will never have an accident. And I believe he will always drive safely. And I believe he'll drive with the seatbelt. And I believe he will keep the maintenance of the car. And I believe that he will ensure that he doesn't use it for his personal gain. While you, as a professional, are working and assuming this will be passive income to you or to your family. That is, from a financial education perspective, completely stupid. But from a risk avoidance, on the other side of avoiding risk, you've taken on too much risk because anybody will tell you a business like that, doing it long distance will never work unless you have a reliable person that can do it for you. But essentially, that means you're just an investor. You're not actually running a business and you're not a business owner in the first place anyway. So that is avoiding financial risk as habit habit number 6. Now, habit number 7 is neglecting emergency funds. Ooh, this is a tough one. I personally, I'm not there yet, and I can admit it from the get-go. Emergency funds are not something that I'm yet to achieve, but I recognize that it's something that I'm working on, and hopefully finding the balance between investing my money and putting money in the market, but also ensuring that I have a nest egg of an investment fund that I can emergency fund that I can really rely on. Now, the financial gurus will tell you if you have an emergency fund of at least 3 to 6 months, it's something that can definitely go a long way. Again, this doesn't apply to a student per se. It's very difficult for a student to even think about it in that perspective. A young professional for sure needs to start thinking that way, and a person like me who has a family definitely needs to be priority number one. But at the same time, if you have financial education, there is different caveats that you can really pull in, and if you're financially savvy, you can really pull that down to maybe 1 or 2 months, knowing that you have passive income in different ways. However, for the financially uh, illiterate, having an emergency fund as an African is almost essential. Why? Because you fundamentally are the spear of a family, spear in terms of you are the head financial kind of forerunner for a lot of people back in your home country, right? Essentially, whether you are in the country itself and you have a business or you're doing well and you have a really good office and you have a really good career, still the forerunner. You are running in front of a lot of your cousins and family and mother and father and sister and so forth. And not having an emergency fund or not having easy access to money, essentially that's what an emergency fund is, would now be putting you, specifically if you have very little financial education and you have very little understanding of how to manage risk, you will put yourself in such a bad situation when an emergency comes, potentially not from you, but from a family member, because now you didn't think about the future. You didn't think about the immediate future, not retirement, immediate future. Emergency fund is saying, hey, in the event I have to pay the hospital bill for my mother who is in the village, my mother's in the village, where would the money come from? Where will it come from? Where will the money come from in paying for her in the village? There is no medical aid. There's no such thing as real medical aid, really, in a village. There's no such thing. So you can't say that the government will pay for it. There isn't such thing. You can't say the insurance company will pay for it. They will screw you from here. They will literally screw the money out of you and completely put you on the side because you're not even there, right? Your mother is old or your mother doesn't even know the jargons that they're talking about, and you are not there to follow up. So essentially you rely on you being your own insurance broker but doing through savings to come up with money at the instant for an emergency. If you don't do that, and if you think about it from an analogy perspective, it's like a smoke detector, right? I don't know if you know, most of you know what a smoke detector is. A smoke detector is actually a device that goes mainly you see them in hotels and in walkways around buildings, especially at work or wherever the case may be in government buildings, and they are usually white and flat and on the ceiling, and they are essentially what they detect smoke. Why? As a preventative measure to sound an alarm in the case of potential fire. Now imagine that smoke detector didn't have a battery. Essentially, it's dead. It's connected, right? It's connected to the alarm and everything, but inside the smoke detector, it has no battery. So it gives you a false sense of security. It gives you a false sense of that everything is fine until there's smoke, until there's an emergency, until a kid started playing with paper in a room and the paper got on the floor, the paper got on the bed, let's say in the hotel room, and now there's fire. That smoke detector should have had a battery and sounded the alarm in an instant, but it doesn't. The whole hotel thinks that's one all the smoke detectors are working. That one smoke detector, Murphy's Law, is the very place where there's a fire, and now the whole building is gone. Just remember that a set of batteries. It didn't cost you much. It just made sure that you buy them and replace them and you check. You don't have, and this is the result. Emergency funds is not exactly just a set of batteries, but in the scheme of your personal finance, it's just a month. It's just 2 months of savings. What is 2 months of savings? You getting to that point over 3, 4 years or over a year, 12 months, saving a twelfth of your salary every month and putting it aside in case of an emergency. And it doesn't even have to be getting to the full amount, but the fact that you are saving allows emergency to happen in between, and you are able to replenish without having to take out high interest credit. Now that is the habit. When you're not able to even think about it in that way, even though you're earning some money, that is financial mold building up. So emergency funds is absolutely crucial in ensuring that you are able to have that security. You're able to ensure that you don't live not only beyond your means, it's got nothing to do with living beyond your means, right? It's got everything to do with you understanding that life happens. Life happens. And if you don't get into your thick head that life will happen to you just like it happened to me. I mean, I never thought I would lose my job and kind of, travel the whole world alone during COVID because life happens. Life does happen. Now, the question is, I at least had access to money. I did, and I was privileged enough to keep my family, kind of healthy, literally paid two bonds, paid the house where they were staying, and I didn't want them to move out, and pay in euros, pay rent here while I was waiting for my job to come through during COVID. I had money and I could do that. But what about the person who didn't think ahead that he's able to access money here and there? What happens to that person, to that family? And I've seen it happen. Just disaster after disaster because you didn't think ahead and you didn't think life will also happen to you. Finally, habit number 8 is, in a way, we've spoken about it already, but it's the accumulation of high interest debt. Oh, this is a tough one. The reason why it's a tough one is because high interest debt is sometimes subjective. What is high interest? In Cameroon, for example, normal interest in getting a loan is 20%. Yep, you heard it. Getting a loan in Cameroon, the interest rate is 20%. Normal loan, same loan, maybe, of course, given exchange rate, different amount of money. In Germany, the same amount. Guess you know how much the interest rate is? Not even 2%. One is a third world country, the other one is a first world country. What's the difference? Risk. It goes back to habit number 6. How do you avoid high risk? And how do you understand the impact of risk? Now, someone will say 20% loan, if I'm able to make it, have a markup of 60%, it was 20%. But what happens if you don't make the markup? How much money are you losing by paying 20% worth of interest? And that is essentially what an African needs to think about. First of all, debt for an African is bad. Debt that comes from an African country, whether through credit card, whether through kind of personal loan, whether it is through, I don't know what other loans is there, revolving loan, is just pure bad. an loan that's taken from a third world country that has high risk, in my mind, you are asking yourself to literally be completely and utterly strained, constrained, like there is a shackle on your neck because financially you are just paying interest on an amount that, in my view, you could have saved up through an emergency. You could have saved up through understanding the power of compound interest in saving, of course. But it goes beyond that. And the analogy of high interest debt accumulation is a clogged kitchen sink, right? A kitchen sink is where we wash uh, food before we cook it. A kitchen sink is where we wash our plates and pans and cutlery and so forth and crockery. But and all that stuff gets goes into the kitchen drain. Now imagine if the kitchen drain gets clogged. All of us know what this is, right? Everybody knows the pain and the inconvenience of a clogged kitchen drain. Now, why is it important when it comes to high debt? It's because a kitchen drain starts clogging slowly, again, like a dripping tap, slowly. But the difference here is that you keep on using the stuff, right? A tap, you can say, okay, this one I don't use, the other one I use. A kitchen drain, you have to use the kitchen. You have to keep on using it. So it starts slowly. The clogging starts slowly. Maybe it doesn't drain too quickly, and you're like, oh, whatever, and you get used to it. You because you just get desensitized to how well a kitchen drain should be working. So you get desensitized. So, but what happens is eventually at some point your ability to have water down has now the water to go down has completely deteriorated because there is a whole chain of sediments and particles in the elbow and in the bend of the drain, and that just won't go away to the point where it is muck and particle and rotten rice and chicken bones and this and that, and sometimes it's a whole spoon that's in there stuck. What do you do? Do you know what you do? You can't clog it out. You can't, shake it. The only way to do is dismantle the whole thing. And dismantling the whole thing means what? It means you don't have a kitchen drain. You don't have a basin to do anything. You know what you do? You don't use that basin anymore. That's what high interest debt does. It completely disrupts your financial ability to provide. Completely disrupts it. And it's completely shackled and it requires even more money to get out of. And I think that's the important part. High debt accumulation requires more money to get out of. You can't stop high interest debt. You have to keep on paying the interest and requires even more money to get out. So my point here for us as Africans, don't get a loan if you do not understand financial education, if you don't have understanding of risk, don't get a loan in your country. Of course, if you understand financial risk, sure, within limit, get a loan. You know exactly how a loan works, right? You know what compound interest works. You know the opportunity cost for that. You know how to leverage maybe some of that money to buy shares and have an understanding of stop loss for certain shares. Go for it. If you've got it down, you understand the risk, you understand exactly where your limit is, you understand your personal appetite for risk and your personal situation, go for it. But unless you know exactly what I just talked about regarding opportunity cost, regarding leveraging debt for your spread on your stocks, and a stop loss to show that you have enough margin before you lose and break even, then don't even bother having high interest rates. And for me, personal advice, even in a first world country, anything above 6% is high interest. Anything above 6% is high interest. That is something to think about. How many of credit cards, how many of revolving loans, how many loans, even in first world countries like the US, have the interest rate below 6%. And why do I say 6%? It's because it gets you closer and closer to what inflation could be or what you could get after inflation on a high yield bond. Or more importantly, what you could be breaking even if you were to take out that loan versus potentially you keeping it in a high interest yield account. For me, it's crucial. Financial education prevents you from getting into a high debt accumulation, which essentially requires you to take away money from the habit of saving money for an emergency. Now you need to pay even more money to get out of debt because your interest rate is running, and all of a sudden, your expenses are way higher than your income. They're all interconnected. They're habits that keep you and I broke if you don't think about thinking of doing the alternative. So that is today's podcast. Today's podcast was trying to get deep on our personal income, personal financial situation, share a little bit about how I see things, how I see a budget, how they're interconnected, and what it means for an African and within the African context to really think about how do we get ourselves out of our financial doldrums and really use the opportunities we have in front of us to bring a better future for our loved ones. This is Polan Kantwe. I am really happy that we had this time. um, this was another episode of MoloMolo where we are trying to get into personal finance and hopefully get into a 3-day course or a webinar where we invite guests and really share stories on how we've managed to get out of personal finance issues, but also take opportunities through financial education to really create a different narrative for our communities and for our families. I'm Dr. Polan Country. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for spending the time with us. Molo Molo has now reached over 400 people who are following us across different platforms. Thank you so much for the bottom of my heart and the different people that are helping me to with feedback and so forth to make this show possible, to have this kind of raw cut discussion being out and about, and I'm really thankful for that. So um, we will keep on going. Thank you for the feedback. We'll keep on trying to ensure that it gets to the masses and this gets out there to the different people who need to hear it. Hopefully, it has made a difference in speaking about some of these stories through different guests and through different topics. Um, this episode will be the last one for a couple of weeks. Even though we'll do some recordings, I will not be uploading anything for the next couple of weeks. I am going on holiday. Yay! Finally. So definitely the next 3 weeks, only then will I get back. Potentially the week that I'm back, in 3 weeks from now, I will definitely have an episode to work on and definitely upload our next podcast guests. And that is going to be also a surprise. The Molo Molo way, right? There is no free lunch. Everything's a surprise just to keep you on your toes. Again, thank you for watching. I hope this was informative. I hope it gave you a good idea of what the different habits are. This is something I'm not an expert. This is something that I'm still going through. I'm learning. I'm trying to figure it out. So I'm definitely not an expert. So I'm trying to keep myself accountable and push myself to keep on learning. I know that I have a privilege, and that privilege should come with the responsibility of learning how to manage that privilege and maximize it so that not just me and my family, but the people around me and the people that love me dearly can benefit as well. I'm Dr. Palenkantwe. Again, until next time. Ciao. All right. So this episode is done. Again, thank you so much for all those who've been watching. Thank you for the likes that I see here. And I'm gonna open up now for any questions that anybody might have. I'm not seeing anybody per se, but I'm assuming this is a couple of people are watching this. So let's just see if I can get to that point. Um, all right. So I'm gonna give our audience maybe one or two. Let's see, 1 or 2 minutes before I close off. Just give me a second. Okay. I see we had some technical issues with some of the guests. They couldn't access for some reason. It's a shame. Oh well. Um, that's fine. I think it's we can always have a Q&A in some other session. So that's also fine. It's not a big deal. I do think that this was already informative enough. So those who managed to follow, I see there were a couple of people online following this. Um, but at the end of the day, it is something that I'm really excited about. Good. Thank you again for watching. Thank you so much for the comments. For those who have watched this, I really appreciate the feedback. This was really an exciting episode to have. Until next time, this is MoloMolo African Tech Stories, where we share stories of tech champions and innovators that are shaping Africa's future. Dr. Polan Conte, until next time. Ciao.